Welcome back to another journey through the quiet corridors of history. Tonight, we're stepping into a world where glory and suffering walked hand in hand, where the most elite soldiers of the ancient world lived lives that were simultaneously privileged and brutally constrained. Before we begin our exploration, if you enjoy what we do here, these gentle wanderings through forgotten lives, feel free to like this video and subscribe to join our community of fellow history lovers. And I'm always curious. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight. There's something wonderfully connecting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across the world, sharing these quiet moments with the past. Now, settle in. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Tonight, we're entering the golden cage of ancient warfare, where being chosen meant being trapped, where immortality was just another word for expendability. We'll walk alongside a Persian immortal, one of the legendary 10,000 who served the Achaemenid kings. We'll feel the weight of his equipment, understand the contradictions of his existence, and explore what it truly meant to be irreplaceable by being utterly replaceable. From there, our journey will take us to the sacred bands and legendary legions, the Praetorian conspiracies, and the technological mysteries that defined elite warfare in the ancient world. Each story a thread in the complex tapestry of duty, honor, and the human cost of empire. So breathe deeply and let yourself drift back 25 centuries to a time when the Persian Empire stretched from the Aegean to the Indus, and 10,000 men carried the weight of imperial power on their shoulders. Verse 1. Daily life of a Persian immortal. The morning mist clings to the hills outside. Persepolis, as a soldier of the Immortals, begins his day. His name, let us call him Artax's, matters less than his position in the great machinery of empire. He is one of exactly 10,000, no more, no less. This number is sacred, maintained with mathematical precision that would make a scribe weep with envy. Artax's rises in the pre-dawn darkness, not from a soldier's rough pallet, but from a proper bed frame strung with leather cords, covered with wool blankets dyed in deep blues and reds that speak of imperial favor. The quarters of the Immortals are not the cramped barracks of common soldiers. Each man has space befitting his status as both elite warrior and palace guard, though the space itself serves as a gentle reminder. Comfort granted can be comfort withdrawn. His first task is not the donning of armor, but ablution. The Zoroastrian prayers must be spoken, the ritual cleansing performed. Water, precious water in this land of careful irrigation, flows freely for the Immortals. As Artaxes washes his hands and face, speaking the ancient words that connect him to Ahura Mazda, the god of light and truth, he performs the same ritual that thousands of his predecessors have performed, and that his replacement, should he fall, will continue tomorrow morning without pause. The uniform of an immortal is a study in contradictions. Rich, yes, but practical. Beautiful, certainly, but designed for the brutal work of war. Artaxes begins with the undergarments. A long tunic of finest linen, soft against the skin, but strong enough to prevent chafing under armor. Over this, the distinctive Persian trousers, shocking to Greek sensibilities, but infinitely practical for a soldier who might find himself fighting in mountain passes or desert sands. The armor itself tells the story of the Persian approach to warfare. Not the bronze hoplon of a Greek hoplite, but scales of iron sewn onto leather backing, flexible as a second skin, yet strong enough to turn a blade. Each scale has been individually fitted, inspected, and approved by our moorsmiths, whose own lives depend on the quality of their work. The armor moves with Artaxes as he bends and stretches, testing the familiar weight that has become as natural as his own muscles. But it is the spear that truly marks him as one of the Immortals. 10 feet of seasoned wood, perfectly balanced, tipped with iron sharp enough to punch through enemy armor. And at the butt, here is the detail that makes Greek historians shake their heads in wonder. A golden pomegranate. Not silver, not bronze, but gold. Each one worth more than a common soldier might see in 5 years of service. The golden pomegranate serves no practical purpose in battle. It does not improve the spear's balance or add to its deadliness. It exists purely to mark status, to declare to anyone who sees it, "This man is precious to the king. This man is one of the chosen. This man is, in the peculiar mathematics of Persian military organization, immortal." Yet as Artaxerxes lifts his spear and feels the familiar weight of that golden ornament, he knows the truth that gives the immortals their name. He is immortal not because he cannot die, but because his death will change nothing. Behind him, in another part of the camp, another man rises and performs the same ablutions, speaks the same prayers, dons the same armor. If Artaxerxes falls today, that man will take his place tomorrow, and the number will remain 10,000. The unit will remain whole. The golden pomegranate will simply transfer to a new shaft, in new hands. This knowledge shadows every moment of an immortal's existence. The privilege is real. The food is better than that of common soldiers, rich with meat and wine, fruits and honey. The equipment is superior, maintained by specialist craftsmen who understand that the king's favor depends on their work. The quarters are comfortable, the duties varied and often interesting. But underneath it all runs the current of expendability dressed up as honor. An immortal guards the king's person, yes, but he also spearheads the most dangerous assaults. He stands in the front rank when enemies must be broken, serves as shock troops when lesser forces have failed. His very presence on a battlefield is meant to communicate the king's seriousness, his willingness to commit his most precious resources. The morning meal arrives as Artaxerxes finishes his preparations. Bread still warm from the ovens, thick with honey and scattered with nuts. Dried fruits from distant provinces, reminders of the empire's vast reach. Wine mixed with water in careful proportion enough to warm the blood, not enough to dull the senses. And meat, always meat, for soldiers who must maintain their strength. As he eats, Artaxerxes can hear the sounds of the camp awakening around him. The stamp and snort of horses, the ring of metal on metal as weapons are tested and adjusted. Voices calling orders in half a dozen languages, for the Persian army is a cosmopolitan affair, drawing strength from every corner of the empire. But above it all, the distinctive sound that marks the quarters of the immortals, the soft chime of golden pomegranates, striking spear shafts as 10,000 men prepare for another day of service. The day's duties might vary: palace guard, escort duty, training exercises that maintain their legendary precision. But the rhythm remains constant, has remained constant for generations. Each immortal performs his role with the mechanical perfection that comes from absolute certainty. He is essential to the empire's functioning, and utterly replaceable within its structure. The paradox of the immortals extends beyond their individual fate to their collective identity. They are, simultaneously, the most elite and the most anonymous force in the Persian military. Each man has earned his place through demonstrated skill and loyalty. Yet once accepted into the ranks, his individual identity becomes subsumed into the greater whole. They move as one organism, think as one mind, respond to orders with a synchronization that seems almost supernatural to their enemies. Training occupies much of their time, not the basic drill that shapes raw recruits, but the refined choreography of elite warfare. They practice formations that can shift from column to line, to wedge with fluid grace, each man knowing his place, not just in the immediate maneuver, but in the greater patterns that might unfold across an entire campaign. They train with their weapons until each motion becomes instinctive, until the spear becomes an extension of their arm, the sword an extension of their will. But perhaps the most crucial training is psychological. An immortal must be capable of absolute obedience while retaining the initiative necessary for effective combat. He must be willing to die for his comrades, while knowing that his death will occasion no mourning, no pause in the unit's effectiveness. He must take pride in his individual skill, while accepting that his individual existence is meaningless except as a component of the greater machine. The afternoon brings weapons practice, and here, the true skill of the Immortals becomes apparent. These are not merely soldiers with better equipment, but warriors who have mastered their craft to a degree that approaches artistry. Watch Artax's work with his spear. See how he shifts from thrust to sweep to butt strike in a flowing sequence that seems almost like a dance. Observe how he uses the length of the weapon to control distance, keeping enemies at bay while maintaining his own freedom of movement. The spear work is supplemented by training with the akinax, the distinctive Persian sword. Shorter than a Greek xiphos, curved slightly for better cutting action, it serves as both weapon and symbol of rank. Every Immortal carries one, and every Immortal has spent countless hours learning to draw and strike in a single fluid motion, to parry and riposte with economical efficiency. But weapons training is only part of the preparation. The Immortals must also master the complex protocols of palace life, for they serve as guards to the King of Kings himself. They learn to move through the labyrinthine ceremonies of the Persian court without disrupting the elaborate rituals that maintain imperial dignity. They study the faces and names of courtiers, ambassadors, and potential threats. They memorize the layouts of palaces they may never see, prepare for contingencies that may never arise. As evening approaches, the training gives way to other duties. Some Immortals will stand guard at the palace gates, their golden pomegranates catching the last light of day. Others will escort important officials or foreign dignitaries, their presence a subtle reminder of the king's power and reach. Still others will conduct inspections, ensuring that the vast military machine continues to function with its legendary efficiency. But for Artaxes, this evening brings a different duty, one that encapsulates the strange duality of the Immortal's existence. He has been chosen for the night watch in the king's private quarters, a position that represents the ultimate trust and the ultimate burden. He will stand motionless for hours, alert to every sound, every shadow, every potential threat to the man whose safety represents the stability of the entire empire. As he takes his position in the candlelit corridor, spear held at the precise angle dictated by centuries of protocol, Artaxes embodies all the contradictions of his role. He is a man transformed into a symbol, an individual subsumed into an institution, a mortal granted immortality through the simple expedient of being replaceable. The candles burn lower as the night progresses, their light playing across the golden pomegranate at the butt of his spear. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the palace walls, another man sleeps in the quarters of the Immortals, ready to take this very position should fate decree it. The knowledge brings neither comfort nor distress. It simply is as natural as the rising and setting of the sun, as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. In this moment, standing guard in the heart of the greatest empire the world has yet seen, Artaxes represents something larger than himself, something that will outlast him by centuries. He is the embodiment of Persian military might, a single thread in a tapestry of conquest and control that stretches from the burning sands of Egypt to the snow-capped peaks of the Hindu Kush. And tomorrow, whether he lives or dies, whether he stands guard or leads a charge, whether he returns home covered in glory or falls forgotten on some distant battlefield, the number will remain the same. 10,000 Immortals will rise with the sun, don their scaled armor, lift their golden-tipped spears, and continue the endless watch that has defined their order since the days of Cyrus the Great. The golden pomegranate gleams in the candlelight, beautiful and meaningless, precious and disposable, like the man who bears it through the long, quiet hours of the Persian night. Verse 2, the sacred band of Thebes, love and death in ancient Greece. The transition from the Persian night to the Greek dawn is not merely one of geography, but of philosophy. Where the Immortals found strength in uniformity and anonymity, we now encounter warriors whose power sprang from the most intimate of human bonds. The sacred band of Thebes represents something unprecedented in the annals of military history, a fighting force bound not by duty to king or state, but by the threads of love itself. Picture, if you will, the training grounds outside Thebes in the year 378 BCE. The morning air carries the scent of olive oil and sweat, the sound of bronze striking bronze, the measured breathing of men pushing their bodies to the limits of endurance. But listen more carefully, and you'll hear something that would be absent from any other military camp of the ancient world. The quiet murmur of intimate conversation, the soft laugh of shared understanding, the gentle correction that passes between lovers. The sacred band was the brainchild of Gorgidas, a Theban general who understood something about human nature that his contemporaries had missed. While other city-states relied on civic duty or professional obligation to motivate their soldiers, Gorgidas proposed to harness the most powerful force known to humanity, the desire to protect one's beloved. The unit consisted of exactly 300 men, organized into 150 pairs. Each pair represented a romantic relationship, what the Greeks called a paiderastia, typically involving an older Orestes and a younger Eromenos. These were not casual relationships formed for military convenience, but deep emotional bonds that often lasted for years, sometimes for life. Consider the morning routine of Cleomenes and Aristodemos, a typical pair within the sacred band. Cleomenes, at 32, is the senior partner, a veteran of several campaigns who has earned his place in this elite unit through demonstrated courage and skill. Aristodemos, 24, is his beloved, chosen not merely for his physical beauty, but for his quick mind and natural grace with weapons. They wait together in the simple barracks that house the sacred band, their sleeping arrangements as natural and accepted as any married couples. The other warriors pay no attention to such intimacies indeed. Many are engaged in their own quiet morning conversations, the soft exchanges that mark the beginning of another day of training together. The physical preparation differs little from that of other elite units. Bodies must be maintained at peak condition, muscles kept supple and strong. Oil is rubbed into skin. It will soon be covered by the bronze and leather of hoplite armor. Weapons are inspected with a meticulous care that separates the living from the dead on ancient battlefields. But watch how Cleomenes adjusts the straps of Aristodemus' armor. See the careful attention he pays to ensuring that every piece fits perfectly, offers maximum protection. Observe how Aristodemus tests the balance of his spear, noting how his beloved's eyes follow every movement, ready to offer suggestion or correction. This is not mere military preparation. It is the ritual of lovers preparing to face death together. The sacred band's equipment marks them as hoplites of the highest quality. Their shields are not the standardized espides of regular citizen soldiers, but individual works of art, each bearing the sacred symbols of Thebes alongside personal devices chosen by the warrior pairs. The bronze gleams with a deep luster that speaks of careful maintenance, polished not by servants, but by the warriors themselves, often working in pairs as they talk quietly of tactics, philosophy, or simply the small intimacies that sustain relationships under the shadow of war. Their spears are perfectly balanced weapons, 8 feet of cornel wood tipped with iron points that can punch through the finest armor. But more than mere weapons, these spears represent the primary tool of the hoplites' trade, the instrument through which courage, skill, and devotion are expressed in the deadly mathematics of phalanx warfare. The training itself reveals the true genius of Gorgidas' innovation. Watch as the sacred band practices the complex maneuvers of phalanx warfare. Each man must maintain his position in the line while simultaneously protecting his beloved, must advance and retreat in perfect synchronization while never losing sight of his partner's safety. The result is a level of battlefield awareness that borders on the supernatural. When Cleomenes advances, his shield work protects not only himself, but creates opportunities for Aristodemos. When Aristodemos strikes with his spear, he does so with the confidence that comes from knowing his beloved will cover any opening his attack might create. They move as one organism, think as one mind, fight with a coordination that years of training together have made instinctive. But the true test of the sacred band's effectiveness came not in training, but in battle. The year 375 BCE found them facing a force of Spartan hoplites near the town of Tegura. The Spartans, veterans of countless victories, confident in their reputation as the finest warriors in Greece, advanced with their traditional discipline and skill. The battle began like so many others in the Greek world, two lines of bronze-clad men approaching each other across a field that would soon be watered with blood. The Spartans, outnumbering the sacred band nearly 2-1, expected a brief, decisive engagement. They had faced Theban forces before and found them wanting. But as the lines closed, something extraordinary happened. The sacred band did not merely fight, they fought with a ferocity and coordination that stunned their enemies. Each warrior drew strength, not just from his own courage, but from his desire to protect the man beside him, to prove worthy of the love they shared, to ensure that neither would have to face the agony of surviving alone. Cleomenes found himself pressed by two Spartan warriors, their spears seeking the gaps in his armor with professional precision. In any normal unit, he might have given ground, sought support from his comrades. But Aristodemus was there, his own spear weaving a deadly pattern that kept the second Spartan at bay, allowing Clemens to focus on his primary opponent. A battle raged for what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes. Bronze rang against bronze, spear points sought flesh, shields battered against shields in the deadly pushing match that decided so many Greek engagements. But gradually, incredibly, the Spartans began to give ground. It was not fear that drove them back. Spartans did not know fear in the conventional sense. It was confusion, the bewilderment of facing opponents who seemed to anticipate each other's moves, who covered each other's weaknesses with preternatural awareness, who fought not as individuals, but as paired organisms of destruction. The breakthrough came when a section of the Spartan line, pressed beyond endurance by the coordinated attacks of the sacred band pairs, finally buckled. Into the gap poured the Thebans, their victory cry echoing across the battlefield as they rolled up the Spartan flanks. For the first time in memory, a Spartan force had been defeated in open battle by a smaller opponent. But victory in battle was only part of the sacred band's story. Their true significance lay in what they represented: a different vision of how human relationships could be organized, of how love and war could intersect, of how the most tender emotions could be transformed into the most effective military force. The barracks life of the sacred band reflected this unique character. Evenings found the warriors engaged in activities that would have seemed foreign to other military units. Philosophy was discussed as eagerly as tactics, poetry recited with the same attention given to weapon maintenance. The older partners often served as teachers to their younger beloveds, passing on not just military skills, but the broader education that Greeks believed essential to a complete man. Cleomenes might spend an evening helping Aristodemus work through a difficult passage of Homer, the ancient words taking on new meaning when read by men who understood firsthand the realities of battle that the poet described. Or they might discuss the philosophical implications of courage. Was it better to die gloriously in battle, or to live and continue serving one's beloved and one's city? These conversations were not mere intellectual exercises. They were part of the process by which the sacred band created its unique identity, forging bonds that transcended the merely physical to encompass the intellectual and spiritual as well. The warriors were expected to be complete men-lovers, fighters, thinkers, citizens, and their evening discussions helped ensure that the military unit remained connected to the broader cultural values of Greek civilization. The sacred band's effectiveness was not limited to single battles. For nearly 4 decades, they served as the elite strike force of the Theban army, spearheading campaigns that established Thebes as the dominant power in Greece. Their reputation grew with each victory, their very presence on a battlefield serving to demoralize enemies who knew they faced opponents bound by ties stronger than mere military discipline. But perhaps their greatest moment came at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, where they served as the hammer that shattered Spartan hegemony forever. Facing the full might of the Spartan army, the Sacred Band anchored the Theban left wing in an unprecedented tactical innovation that concentrated maximum force at the point of decision. The battle itself was a masterpiece of coordinated violence. The Sacred Band, fighting with the desperate courage of men protecting their beloved, smashed through the Spartan right wing like a bronze-tipped spear through linen. Behind them came the rest of the Theban army, pouring through the gap created by their elite vanguard. When the dust settled, Spartan power lay broken on the field of Leuctra. The warriors who had dominated Greece for generations were revealed to be mortal after all, vulnerable to opponents who fought with something more than professional skill, who fought with love. Yet even in their moment of greatest triumph, the Sacred Band carried within itself the seeds of its own destruction. The very bonds that made them so effective in battle also made them vulnerable to a particular kind of defeat. An ordinary military unit, faced with overwhelming odds, might break and scatter, allowing individual soldiers to escape and fight another day. But the Sacred Band could not break, would not abandon their beloved to face death alone. This limitation would prove fatal at Chaeronea in 338 BCE, where they faced the disciplined phalanx of Philip II of Macedon and his son, the young Alexander. Surrounded and outnumbered, they could have retreated, preserved themselves for future battles. Instead, they chose to die together rather than live apart. The aftermath of Chaeronea revealed the true depth of the bonds that had made the Sacred Band unique. When Philip surveyed the battlefield and found the 300 bodies of the Sacred Band, he discovered something that moved even his hardened warrior's heart. They lay in pairs, each man beside his beloved, their bodies testament to a devotion that had transcended death itself. Philip, according to the historians, wept when he saw them. Perish any man who suspects that these men either did or suffered anything that was base, he declared, ordering that they be buried with honor on the very spot where they had fallen. The monument that marks their graves still stands, a stone lion keeping eternal watch over the remains of men who chose love over life, who found in their deepest personal relationships the strength to achieve military greatness, who proved that the most tender emotions could be transformed into the most devastating military effectiveness. In the gathering dusk of Greek independence, as the city-states fell one by one to Macedonian conquest, the Sacred Band represented something precious that was passing from the world. They embodied the Greek ideal of excellence in all things military, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. They proved that warriors need not be brutal, that love need not be weakness, that the most elite fighting force could also be the most humane. Their legacy extended far beyond their military achievements. The Sacred Band challenged conventional assumptions about masculinity, about the relationship between private affection and public duty, about the sources of human courage. They demonstrated that men could be both tender lovers and fierce warriors, that the same hands that caressed in the darkness could wield spear and sword with deadly effectiveness in the light. As night falls over the ancient battlefield of Chaeronea, imagine the silence that now covers the spot, where 300 men chose to die together rather than live apart. Their story reminds us that even in the brutal mathematics of ancient warfare, human love could transform tactical necessity into something approaching the sacred. The Sacred Band of Thebes fought their last battle more than 2 millennia ago, but their example continues to illuminate the complex relationship between personal devotion and public service, between individual desire and collective responsibility. They prove that the deepest human emotions, far from being a distraction from duty, could become the very foundation of excellence. In their brief, brilliant existence, they showed the world what was possible when love and war walked hand in hand, when the most intimate bonds became the source of the most public courage. They remain unique in military history, warriors who found in their bedchambers the strength that carried them to victory on the battlefield, lovers who discovered in each other's arms the courage to face death itself. Verse 3. The secret of Roman steel, the mystery of Lorica segmentata. From the intimate bonds of Greek warriors, we now turn to a different kind of sophistication, the cold precision of Roman engineering made manifest in metal and leather. The Lorica segmentata, that iconic armor that has become synonymous with the Roman legionary, represents one of the most complex and mysterious developments in ancient military technology. Its story is one of innovation and abandonment, of practical genius and puzzling obsolescence. In the quiet of a Roman armory, perhaps in the fortress town of Vindobona on the Danube frontier, the morning light filters through high windows to illuminate rows of segmented armor hanging from wooden posts, like the molted shells of great bronze insects. Each suit represents hundreds of hours of meticulous craftsmanship, the accumulated wisdom of generations of armorers, and the peculiar Roman genius for transforming practical problems into elegant solutions. The creation of a single suit of Lorica segmentata began not with a dramatic ring of hammer on anvil, but with careful planning and precise measurement. The Roman approach to warfare, like the Roman approach to most things, was fundamentally systematic. Every piece of equipment was standardized, every process documented, every innovation tested and refined through generations of use. Picture the workshop of Marcus Fabricius, an armorer working in the reign of Trajan, when the Lorica segmentata reached its peak of development. His hands, permanently stained with the black of iron oxide and the brown of leather dye, move with the precision of long practice as he works on a new commission, a complete suit of armor for a centurion of the Legio ex Fretensis. The process begins with the selection of materials. The iron must be of the highest quality, smelted from ore carefully chosen for its purity and consistency. Roman metallurgy, while not as advanced as modern techniques, had achieved a remarkable level of sophistication through centuries of military necessity. The iron is worked and reworked, folded and hammered to drive out impurities, until it achieves the fine grain structure that would allow it to be formed into the thin, flexible plates that give the Lorica segmentata its distinctive appearance. Each individual plate, and there are dozens in a complete suit, must be cut to precise specifications, shaped to follow the contours of the human torso, and polished to a finish that serves both practical and ceremonial purposes. The practical aspect is obvious. A smooth surface deflects blows more effectively than a rough one, and is easier to clean and maintain. The ceremonial purpose is equally important. Roman soldiers were expected to look like soldiers, and the gleaming ranks of segmented armor served to intimidate enemies and inspire confidence in allies. But the true genius of the Lorica segmentata lay not in its individual components, but in how those components work together. Watch as Marcus Fabricius assembles the armor, his practiced fingers working leather thongs through bronze fittings with the fluid efficiency of long experience. The system is ingenious in its simplicity, overlapping plates of iron held together by internal leather straps. The whole assembly designed to flex and move with the wearer while providing protection that was, pound for pound, superior to any other armor system of its time. The shoulders present the greatest challenge, as they must provide protection while allowing the full range of motion necessary for effective sword work. The Roman solution was characteristically elegant, a series of curved plates that overlap like the scales of some great fish, each one carefully shaped to follow the natural lines of shoulder and arm movement. When properly fitted, a legionary could swing his gladius with full force, thrust his pilum with perfect accuracy, and raise his scutum to deflect incoming missiles, all while encased in armor that covered him from shoulder to waist. The process of donning the Lorica segmentata was itself a ritual that spoke to the communal nature of Roman military life. Unlike the simple tunic-like mail shirts used by auxiliary troops, segmented armor required assistance to put on properly. A legionary would typically have his tent mate help him into his armor, checking the fit of each plate, ensuring that the leather straps were properly tensioned, verifying that nothing would shift or bind during the violent exertions of combat. This mutual dependence extended beyond mere practicality. The act of helping a comrade into his armor was a daily affirmation of the bonds that held the legion together, a physical manifestation of the Roman military principle that survival depended on collective discipline rather than individual heroics. As one legionary adjusted another's shoulder guards, he was literally placing his trust in that man's hands, knowing that his own life might depend on his comrade's protection. The effectiveness of the larica segmentata in battle was legendary, though the legends often obscured the practical realities of its use. Roman military manuals, fragmentary though they are, suggest that the armor was most effective against the slashing attacks favored by barbarian warriors, less so against the thrusting weapons used by more sophisticated opponents. The overlapping plates could turn aside a Celtic long sword with relative ease, but a well-placed spear thrust or a powerful arrow shot could still find the gaps between the segments. This limitation was not lost on Roman military engineers, who constantly refined and modified the design to address specific tactical challenges. Archaeological evidence from sites across the empire reveals dozens of variations on the basic segmented theme, some with additional plates to protect the arms, others with modified shoulder configurations for mounted troops, still others with specialized fittings for officers who needed to be easily recognizable on the battlefield. The production of larica segmentata on the scale required by the Roman army represented an enormous logistical challenge. At the height of the empire, Rome maintained legions from Scotland to Syria, from the Rhine to the Euphrates. Each legion required thousands of suits of armor, not to mention the constant need for repairs, replacements, and modifications. The administrative machinery necessary to coordinate this effort was as impressive in its way as the armor itself. Iron ore had to be mined, transported to smelting sites, and processed into usable metal. Leather had to be prepared from hides that might come from cattle raised hundreds of miles from where the armor would be used. Bronze fittings required access to tin, a relatively rare metal that often had to be imported from distant provinces. The coordination of all these resources, the maintenance of supply lines, the training of skilled craftsmen, all of this represented a level of organizational sophistication that would not be seen again in Europe for more than 1,000 years after Rome's fall. Yet for all its practical advantages and manufacturing complexity, the larica segmentata contained within itself the paradox of Roman military thinking. It was, simultaneously, the most advanced armor system of its time, and a symbol of the inflexibility that would eventually contribute to Rome's decline. The very standardization that made mass production possible also made innovation difficult. The complex supply chains that enabled empire-wide deployment also created vulnerabilities that clever enemies could exploit. The decline of the larica segmentata began in the 3rd century as the empire faced new challenges from new enemies. The rigid formations that had made segmented armor so effective proved inadequate against the mobile tactics of Persian heavy cavalry and Germanic war bands. The complex logistics that had sustained the armor's production became increasingly difficult to maintain as trade routes were disrupted and provincial economies destabilized. More fundamentally, the social structures that had made the legion possible were changing. The citizen soldiers who had once been the backbone of Roman military power were gradually replaced by barbarian foederati and professional limitanei, whose loyalty was more mercenary than patriotic. These new soldiers had different needs, different fighting styles, different relationships with the equipment they carried. The archaeological record tells the story of this transition in fragments of discarded metal and leather. Sites from the later empire show fewer examples of complete larica segmentata, more simple mail shirts and scale armor that could be produced locally and maintained without the sophisticated supply chains that the segmented system required. The craftsmanship, too, shows signs of decline plates that are less perfectly shaped, fittings that are cruder in execution. overall assemblies that speak of haste rather than the meticulous care that had characterized earlier production. By the 4th century, the larica segmentata had largely disappeared from Roman armies, replaced by simpler armor systems that were easier to produce and maintain. The knowledge of how to make it properly was gradually lost, surviving only in fragmentary references in military manuals and the occasional archaeological discovery that reveals hints of techniques that died with their practitioners. The mystery deepens when we consider how completely this sophisticated technology vanished. Medieval armorers, working centuries later, would develop their own solutions to the problem of flexible body armor, but they seem to have been entirely ignorant of Roman achievements. The complex interplay of overlapping plates, internal leather strapping, and bronze fittings that had protected Roman legionaries was forgotten so thoroughly that when archaeologists began uncovering examples in the 19th century, they initially had no idea how the pieces fit together. Modern reconstructions of larica segmentata, based on careful study of archaeological remains and experimental archaeology, reveal just how sophisticated the original design truly was. Contemporary armorers, working with modern tools and techniques, struggle to match the precision and elegance of Roman craftsmanship. The subtle curves of the plates, the complex geometry of the overlaps, the ingenious system of internal tensioning. All of this represents a level of understanding of both metallurgy and human anatomy that was not equaled again until the Renaissance. Yet questions remain. Why did the Romans abandon such an effective system? Was it purely practical considerations, cost, complexity, changing tactical requirements, or were there deeper cultural and social factors at work? Some historians argue that the decline of the larica segmentata reflected the broader decline of Roman civic culture, the gradual transformation of citizen soldiers into professional warriors who had different relationships with their equipment than their state. Others suggest that the armor's disappearance was more prosaic, simply the result of economic pressure and supply line disruption during the crisis of the 3rd century. Without the stable administrative structures that had made mass production possible, individual commanders were forced to rely on whatever armor they could obtain locally, leading to the gradual replacement of standardized equipment with ad hoc solutions. The truth probably lies somewhere between these explanations. The larica segmentata represented not just a piece of military equipment, but an entire worldview Roman confidence in the power of organization and standardization, Roman belief in the superiority of disciplined collective action over individual heroics, Roman faith in the ability of technology and logistics to overcome any challenge. As that worldview crumbled under the pressure of new realities, barbarian invasions, economic instability, political fragmentation, the complex systems that had sustained Roman military dominance became increasingly difficult to maintain. The larica segmentata, perhaps more than any other artifact, embodies this transition from the confident sophistication of the high empire to the pragmatic adaptations of the later period. In the quiet of a modern museum, a reconstructed suit of larica segmentata stands in a climate-controlled case, its polished plates gleaming under carefully positioned lights. Visitors pause to admire its elegant functionality, to puzzle over the complexity of its construction, to wonder at the organizational capacity that made its mass production possible. But the armor in the case, for all its historical accuracy, cannot convey the full reality of what it represented. To understand the larica segmentata truly, one must imagine it not as a museum piece, but as a living system part of the daily routine of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, maintained by vast networks of craftsmen and suppliers, embedded in the social and political structures that made Roman military dominance possible. The mystery of its disappearance is, ultimately, the mystery of civilizational change itself, how sophisticated technologies can be lost, how complex systems can collapse, how the accumulated wisdom of generations can vanish so completely that later ages struggle even to understand what their predecessors achieved. As the museum closes and the lights dim around the silent armor, we are left with questions that extend far beyond the realm of military history. In our own age of complex technologies and global supply chains, what lessons might we draw from the rise and fall of the Larica segmentata? What does its story tell us about the relationship between technological sophistication and social stability, between innovation and tradition, between the forces that drive civilizations forward and those that ultimately bring them to an end? The answers, like the armor itself, remain tantalizingly just beyond our grasp, visible in outline, comprehensible in general principle, but ultimately as mysterious as the civilization that created it and then, for reasons we can only partially understand, chose to let it slip away into the darkness of forgotten time. Verse 4. The Golden Cage, life among the Praetorian Guard, the final thread in our tapestry of elite warriors, leads us to Rome itself, to the marble corridors of imperial palaces, where the most privileged soldiers in the empire lived lives of supreme comfort and perpetual danger. The Praetorian Guard represented the ultimate evolution of the warrior courtier, men who had traded the honest brutality of frontier warfare for the subtle treacheries of palace politics, who found themselves simultaneously the most powerful and most vulnerable soldiers in the Roman world. In the pre-dawn quiet of the Castra Praetoria, the great fortified camp that housed the Praetorian Guard in Rome, a different kind of military mourning unfolds. Unlike the frontier legions with their harsh reviles and Spartan accommodations, the Praetorians wake to a world of relative luxury that would have been unimaginable to their brothers serving on the Rhine or the Euphrates. Let us follow Gaius Valerius Maximus, a veteran Praetorian in the reign of Hadrian, as he begins another day in the service of the most powerful man in the world. His quarters, shared with only one other soldier, rather than the 8 tent mates of a regular legionary, are furnished with comforts that speak to the guard's privileged status. A proper bed with a feather mattress, woolen blankets dyed in rich colors, a small brazier for warmth, even a window that looks out over the gardens of the camp. The morning ritual begins not with the hasty ablutions of campaign life, but with the careful grooming expected of men who might be called upon to appear before the emperor at any moment. Valerius bathes in water heated by hypocaust, the same heating system that warmed the finest private homes in Rome. His uniform, when he dons it, is a masterpiece of military tailoring, not the simple tunic and armor of a regular soldier, but a carefully crafted ensemble that marks him as one of the elect. The Praetorian uniform evolved over the centuries from practical military gear into something approaching court dress. By Hadrian's time, it included a distinctive white tunic that set the guards apart from the red-clad legions, armor that was more decorative than functional, and accessories that spoke of wealth and status rather than battlefield utility. The famous Praetorian helmet, with its distinctive plume and elaborate metalwork, served more as a symbol of imperial favor than as practical protection. But it is in the nature of their duties that the true character of Praetorian life becomes apparent. Where regular soldiers faced the honest dangers of barbarian raids and frontier warfare, the Praetorians navigated the far more treacherous waters of imperial politics. Their primary enemy was not the Germanic tribesman or Parthian cataphract, but the senator with a concealed dagger, the freedman with poisoned wine, the rival claimant with promises of gold. The morning briefing in the Principia of the Castra Praetoria reveals the complexity of Praetorian responsibilities. Valerius, as a senior guardsman, receives assignments that have little to do with traditional soldiering. Today, he will escort a delegation of senators to their meeting with the emperor, standing silent and watchful as they discuss matters of state. Later, he will join a small detail investigating reports of seditious graffiti found near the Circus Maximus. This evening, he will stand guard at a private dinner party, protecting the emperor not from armed assassins, but from the more subtle dangers of social intercourse. Each of these duties requires a different kind of skill, a different sort of vigilance. The Praetorian must be able to read faces as well as terrain, to detect treachery in a glance as readily as he might spot an ambush in broken ground. He must understand the complex web of relationships that bind the Roman elite together, know which senators support the current emperor and which might be swayed to support a rival, recognize which freedmen carry real influence and which are merely decorative. This knowledge comes at a price. A Praetorian who wishes to survive and prosper must become, in effect, a professional courtier as well as a soldier. He must learn to speak with the educated accent of the Roman upper classes, to understand references to literature and philosophy, to conduct himself with the dignified bearing expected of those who serve in the emperor's presence. The transformation is both subtle and profound. Watch Valerius as he moves through his duties. See how his military bearing softens when he enters the palace proper, how his voice modulates to the cultured tones expected in such refined surroundings, how his entire demeanor shifts to match the expectations of his environment. He remains a soldier, but he has become something else as well. A guardian of civilization rather than a mere warrior. This duality extends to every aspect of Praetorian life. Their pay, for instance, far exceeds that of regular legionaries, not just because of their elite status, but because they must maintain themselves in a style befitting their position. A Praetorian cannot appear at court in the simple tunic of a common soldier. He must dress, speak, and conduct himself as befits one who serves in the presence of divinity itself. Yet this privilege comes with its own burdens. The Praetorian lives constantly under scrutiny, his every action subject to interpretation by enemies and allies alike. A casual conversation with the wrong senator, a momentary lapse in protocol, even an unfortunate expression at the wrong moment, any of these could be construed as evidence of disloyalty, with consequences that range from disgrace to death. The psychological pressure of such existence is immense. Where the frontier soldier faces clear, comprehensible dangers, the enemy arrow, the winter storm, the failed harvest, the Praetorian must navigate threats that are often invisible until it is too late to counter them. The senator who smiles and offers wine may be planning assassination. The freedman who asks innocent questions may be probing for weaknesses. The fellow guardsman who shares confidences may be reporting every word to ambitious rivals. This atmosphere of perpetual suspicion creates its own peculiar loyalty. The Praetorians develop an intense solidarity born of shared vulnerability, a mutual dependence that goes far beyond the normal bonds of military comradeship. They protect each other not just from physical harm, but from the more subtle dangers of political miscalculation and social error. Yet this same solidarity can, paradoxically, become the greatest threat to the emperor they are sworn to protect. The Praetorian Guard, by its very nature, possesses the access and opportunity necessary to remove an emperor as easily as to defend him. Throughout Roman history, the guards who were meant to be the ultimate guarantors of imperial safety repeatedly proved to be the most dangerous threat to imperial survival. The temptations are obvious. A Praetorian prefect, commanding the loyalty of 9,000 armed men stationed in the heart of the empire, wields power that rivals that of the emperor himself. When that emperor proves incompetent, cruel, or simply unpopular, the guards face a terrible choice: loyalty to an unworthy master, or the opportunity to place a better man on the throne, perhaps even themselves. The history of the Praetorian Guard is punctuated by moments when this choice was made. In 41 CE, they assassinated Caligula and elevated Claudius. In 69 CE, the year of the four emperors, they played a crucial role in the rapid succession of rulers that convulsed the empire. In 193 CE, they literally auctioned the imperial throne to the highest bidder, selling the purple to Didius Julianus in a scene that epitomized the corruption of the imperial system. Each such intervention followed a similar pattern. Discontent would simmer in the ranks as the current emperor's failings became impossible to ignore. Secret meetings would be held in the Castra Praetoria. Carefully worded conversations would test the loyalty of key officers. Discreet contacts would be made with potential replacements. When the moment came, It would be swift and decisive, a blade in a palace corridor, a declaration of loyalty to a new master, the presentation of a severed head to the Senate as proof that the old order had ended. Yet the Praetorians who participated in such coups rarely benefited from them in the long term. The new emperor, however grateful he might be initially, would always remember that the guards who had elevated him could just as easily remove him. The loyalty that could be bought once could be bought again, and prudent rulers took steps to ensure that their guardians remained properly motivated or properly controlled. This created a peculiar dynamic in Praetorian service. On one hand, the guards represented the ultimate expression of Roman military professionalism. Elite soldiers serving at the very heart of empire, maintained at the highest possible standard, accorded privileges that marked them as the cream of the military establishment. On the other hand, they were trapped in a role that made them perpetual threats to the very system they were meant to protect. The daily reality of this contradiction shaped every aspect of Praetorian life. The legionaries, standing guard outside the emperor's private study, listens to the muffled voices within discussing matters of state that could affect millions of lives. He knows that with a few swift steps, he could end those discussions forever, could change the course of history with a single thrust of his sword. The knowledge is both intoxicating and terrifying, a burden that weighs on every Praetorian who ever stood such duty. The temptation is made worse by the intimate knowledge that proximity brings. The Praetorian sees the emperor not as the godlike figure presented to the public, but as a man, often a flawed, petty, frightened man who depends entirely on the loyalty of subordinates for his continued existence. It becomes increasingly difficult to maintain proper reverence for someone whose weaknesses are so apparent, whose humanity is so obvious. Yet most Praetorians, most of the time, remained loyal. They took their oaths seriously, understood that their privileged position depended on the stability of the imperial system, recognized that their own welfare was tied to that of their master. Valerius, for all his awareness of the emperor's flaws, continues to serve faithfully because the alternative, chaos, civil war, the collapse of the order that has given his life meaning is too terrible to contemplate. The social isolation that comes with Praetorian service reinforces this loyalty through necessity. A Praetorian cannot easily return to civilian life. His years of palace service have unfitted him for normal occupations, marked him with associations that make him suspect to potential employers. He cannot join the regular legions. His soft living and court manners would make him an object of ridicule to hardened frontier soldiers. He is trapped in his golden cage, dependent on imperial favor for everything that makes his existence tolerable. This dependence extends beyond the individual to the institution itself. The Praetorian Guard exists only as long as there is an emperor to guard. Its members' privileges, status, and identity are all derived from their relationship to the imperial person. They cannot afford to let the empire collapse, because their own destruction would inevitably follow. Yet the very success of the Guard in preserving imperial stability contains the seeds of imperial weakness. By insulating the emperor from direct contact with his subjects, the Praetorians create a bubble of unreality that can lead to catastrophic miscalculations. The ruler who depends entirely on his guards for information about the outside world may find himself governing an empire he no longer understands, making decisions based on filtered reports rather than direct experience. The reign of Commodus provides a perfect example of this dynamic. Surrounded by Praetorians who told him only what he wanted to hear, the emperor gradually lost touch with reality, indulging in fantasies of divine status, while the actual business of government fell into chaos. When the guards finally decided he had become too dangerous to tolerate, their solution, assassination followed by the installation of a new emperor, only perpetuated the cycle of dependence and isolation that had created the problem in the first place. The final irony of Praetorian service lies in its ultimate futility. For all their privilege, all their power, all their proximity to the throne, the guards could never truly solve the fundamental problem of imperial succession. They could remove bad emperors and install better ones, but they could not create a system that would consistently produce good rulers. Each intervention was a temporary expedient, a tactical solution to a strategic problem that remained fundamentally unsolvable. As the empire entered its long decline, the Praetorian Guard became increasingly irrelevant to the real challenges facing Roman civilization. The threats that mattered: barbarian invasions, economic collapse, administrative breakdown, could not be addressed by palace conspiracies or imperial assassinations. The skills that made a good Praetorian political awareness, courtly manners, discretion in sensitive situations, had little bearing on the military and administrative competencies needed to govern a failing state. The end, when it came, was appropriately inglorious. In 312 CE, Constantine defeated his rival Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge and immediately dissolved the Praetorian Guard as a political force. The survivors were scattered to frontier postings, their barracks demolished, their privileged status abolished. After nearly 4 centuries of service, the most elite unit in the Roman army vanished with barely a whimper. In the gathering darkness of a Roman evening, as the last light fades from the windows of the abandoned Castra Praetoria, we might imagine the ghosts of former Praetorians walking their ancient rounds. They patrol corridors that no longer echo with the footsteps of emperors, stand guard at gates that no longer admit the powerful and ambitious, maintain a watch over an empire that no longer exists. Their story serves as a meditation on the nature of elite service itself, the privileges and burdens that come with proximity to power, the moral compromises required by political survival, the ultimate futility of trying to preserve through force what can only be maintained through legitimacy. They were, in their way, the perfect soldiers for an imperfect system, warriors whose greatest victories were also their greatest defeats. The Praetorian Guard represents the final evolution of the warrior class we have followed through this long night's journey. From the anonymous discipline of the Persian Immortals, through the passionate bonds of the sacred band, past the technological sophistication of the legionary system, we arrive at last at this: soldiers who became courtiers, warriors who became kingmakers, guardians who became the greatest threat to what they were meant to protect. In their rise and fall, we see reflected the entire arc of ancient military history, the eternal tension between individual ambition and collective duty, between the needs of the moment and the requirements of long-term stability, between the human desire for security and the human capacity for self-destruction. They remind us that even the most elite forces, the most privileged warriors, the most carefully selected guardians are, in the end, only human subject to the same fears, desires, and failings that have shaped the course of history since the first soldier ever raised a weapon in defense of his tribe. Conclusion. And so our journey through the gilded cages of ancient warfare draws to its close. We have walked alongside the Persian Immortal in his dawn ablutions, felt the weight of his golden pomegranate and the burden of his replaceable immortality. We have stood with the lovers of the sacred band as they faced death together rather than life apart, their devotion transforming the most tender emotions into the most devastating military force. We have traced the mysterious rise and fall of Roman steel, watching as the sophisticated Larica segmentata emerged from the forges of empire, only to vanish into the darkness of forgotten knowledge. And we have lingered in the marble corridors of imperial palaces, observing the Praetorian Guard as they navigated the treacherous waters between loyalty and ambition, protection and conspiracy. Each of these stories illuminates a different facet of the same fundamental truth, that even the most elite warriors, the most privileged soldiers, the most carefully selected guardians remain trapped within the larger currents of history. The Persian Immortal, for all his golden ornaments and imperial favor, could not prevent the decline of the Achaemenid dynasty. The sacred band, for all their courage and devotion, could not halt the Macedonian conquest that ended Greek independence. The Roman legionary, protected by the finest armor ever devised, could not stop the empire's gradual transformation and eventual fragmentation. The Praetorian Guard, wielding power at the very heart of the Roman state, could not solve the fundamental problems of imperial succession and legitimacy. There is something both humbling and oddly comforting in this recognition. These men are Taxes standing his eternal watch, Cleomenes and Aristodemus facing death together, Marcus Fabricius crafting armor for warriors he would never meet, the Leriers navigating the dangers of palace politics, were not so different from ourselves. They faced the same basic challenges that confront every generation. How to serve something larger than themselves while maintaining their individual dignity. How to balance personal desires with collective responsibilities. How to find meaning in work that may ultimately prove futile. The weapons and armor change. The political systems evolve. The enemies shift and adapt. But the fundamental human questions remain constant. What does it mean to serve? What is the proper relationship between individual ambition and collective good? How do we maintain honor in a world that often seems to reward only expedience? These ancient warriors grappled with these questions just as we do, and their answers, partial, imperfect, often contradictory, still speak to us across the centuries. Perhaps the most profound lesson of their stories lies not in their achievements, impressive though those were, but in their limitations. The Persian Empire, for all its administrative sophistication and military might, could not adapt to changing circumstances. The Greek city-states, for all their cultural brilliance and military innovation, could not overcome their fundamental disunity. The Roman system, for all its engineering marvels and organizational genius, could not solve the problem of peaceful succession. Each civilization, each military system, each elite unit contained within itself the contradictions that would eventually lead to its transformation or destruction. Yet this is not a story of failure, exactly. It is, rather, a story of human striving of individuals and institutions attempting to create order, meaning, and beauty in a world that often seems chaotic and purposeless. The Persian Immortal may have been ultimately replaceable, but his daily ritual of service gave structure and meaning to his existence. The sacred band may have perished at Chaeronea, but their example of love transformed into courage continues to inspire. The Roman legionaries' armor may have been abandoned and forgotten, but the principles of organization and standardization that created it laid the foundation for much that followed. The Praetorian Guard may have been dissolved by Constantine, but their long service helped preserve the imperial system that, in modified form, would endure for another 1,000 years in the East. In the end, perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the true measure of these ancient warriors lies not in their ultimate success or failure, but in their willingness to serve, to strive, to continue the long human project of creating civilization in the face of entropy and chaos. They remind us that we are all, in our various ways, soldiers in this same ancient campaign, fighting not for territory or treasure, but for the preservation and extension of human dignity, knowledge, and beauty. The night is deep now, and the ancient battles have long since ended. The spears have been stacked, the armor hung on its pegs, the watches changed for the last time. In the gathering darkness, we can almost hear the echoes of their marching songs, see the glint of bronze and iron in the dying light, feel the weight of history settling like a comfortable blanket over the shoulders of the world. Rest now, knowing that their vigil continues in memory, that their service was not in vain, that the long watch they maintained has been passed down through generations to our own hands. The golden pomegranates no longer gleam, the lovers no longer stand together, the segmented armor no longer protects, the palace guards no longer walk their rounds, but the human spirit that animated them all lives on, finding new forms, facing new challenges, carrying forward the eternal human project of creating order from chaos, meaning from confusion, beauty from the raw material of existence. Sleep well and dream of bronze and steel, of courage and devotion, of the long, slow march of human civilization through the corridors of time. The ancient warriors have earned their rest, and so have you. Tomorrow will bring its own battles, its own challenges, its own opportunities for service and sacrifice. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, all is well. The watch continues, as it always has, as it always will, in the careful hands of those who understand that some things are worth protecting, even unto death. The story ends as it began, with the simple recognition that we are all temporary guardians of something larger than ourselves, all soldiers in an army whose ultimate victory may be beyond our comprehension, but whose daily battles require our constant attention. In the lives of these ancient warriors, we see reflected our own struggles and aspirations, our own fears and hopes, our own small but significant role in the great drama of human history. And now, as the last echoes of ancient trumpets fade into silence, as the final guard changes at the gates of memory, let yourself drift into the peaceful darkness, knowing that you are part of this same eternal story, this same long campaign, this same beautiful, tragic, magnificent human endeavor that has no end save in the dreams of those who carry it forward, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of service at a time. Sleep now. The watch continues.